understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
We are back with another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. I am extremely excited about this show. The FinTech exit, why this exec retired at the top of his game. This is it's going to be a really good show. I'm really excited. Dan, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. You're a returning guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's like that SNL. I'm a third timer after 5. I hope to get like a jacket or something.
Yeah, once we get one, you'll be the first to get it. So let me get into let's do some housekeeping stuff and do that real quick. It's an issue we're having. Okay, on one of these things. We are streaming live from LinkedIn, YouTube. We also have a stream going from Instagram through the phone. So if you're on Instagram, go to the techbehindfintech.com and you can see my guest instead of just looking at my side view. So on that note, we are the Tech Behind FinTech. Let me formally introduce my guest and let's jump into today's topic. So today's topic, as I said earlier, the FinTech exit, why this exec retired at the top of his game. Dan Faltyn is a veteran of financial giants like JPMorgan, Goldman Sachs, and most recently spent 3 years in risk and compliance at Google. With a background in math and computer science, he's earned patents in cybersecurity like global teams and helped organizations meet top security standards. But Dan considers his greatest achievement the success of those he's mentored. Inspired by the book Die with Zero, he's stepping away from tech at the top of his game to reclaim time, focus on family, and redefine what success means, starting with a few non-negotiable pumpkin carving sessions. Dan, so listen, man, let's let the kid out of the bag, right? We're doing this show. Dan and I are friends. We worked together at my first FinTech financial job over 20 years ago. So to see him announcing his retirement, I found personally amazing. And I said, dude, I have to get you in the Tech Behind FinTech and we have to talk about it because I'm like very interested in this topic. So the first question, why are you walking away when everything's going great?
Yeah, it's fine. I don't know if it's walking away. And I think you sort of touched on it a little bit before. Part of it's like a recharacterization, and not to over-index on the book, but the book Die with Zero definitely helped me frame a little bit of my perspective. Not to let the cat out of the bag with that. A lot of people, they know that book, they've heard it, and they think die with zero means, oh, when I die, I'm going to die with zero money left. It's really not that. It's more about classifying the different type of capital you have in your life, not just the financial capital, but your family capital, your friend capital, your education capital, and making sure you spend all of those at the right time. So right now, I think it's time to change the focus, which, to be blunt, for the vast majority of my life was focused on money, on my career, and specifically devoted to the fintech space, cybersecurity, programming, all those sorts of good stuff. So it's time to kind of reevaluate that. But for now, just taking a little breather.
So let's with this breather, when was the moment that you knew that you needed a breather?
You know, I don't think I had a moment where I needed a breather. I think I had a moment where you know what? It's funny because, you know, you're on social media quite a bit. I'm on social media. And it sounds a little hokey, I guess, but started to spend more time looking at the Facebook memories that pop up. Say, what did you did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, rather than almost egotistically posting stuff that's happening now. Of course, still do that, still try to put out, and hence the reason why you got in touch with me here, right? Like putting a couple of shout outs. But I kind of said, you know what else is out there? What else do I want to explore? And hopefully we'll have time to talk about this. my last semester at Google was very gracious to let me do effectively a reverse sabbatical. And I went and I taught computer science at North Carolina A&T. And that opened up a whole new perspective of like, I always said at some point, oh, my retirement plan, I'll go teach. I had no idea what that meant. I had a chance to experience that. And I think that's an avenue I want to devote more time to.
So, all right, sounds good. So in terms of big finance, like you said, we work together in finance. You hit a lot of the firms, JPMorgans of the world to the Goldmans and so forth. Would you say at this stage you're totally done? A few years from now, someone hits you up with an amazing opportunity. Would you consider coming back?
Probably. It's hard to take a lot of the opportunities, the great financial opportunities, the great technological opportunities that we were exposed to. It might be hard to say no to some of those opportunities. Now, it is ironic I say that because right now, look at what's happening with the evolution of AI and Gen AI. And to me, and hopefully to you as well, dude, this is exactly what we went through in the like mid to late 90s, right? Like the web was new. And I look at a lot of the parallels happening now. And sure, it's a different technology. There's different outcomes from these technology stacks, but it's the same thing, and some of the things I think about is, I was trained in math and computer science, and I only realized this, I think, decades later. I think I was the only one for years, or a select few people, that actually knew what was going on. I think a lot of people we probably worked with that were 10, 20, 30 years in the game, they didn't know what the web was. You and I sort of knew what the web was. We were kind of exposed to it. And when I was teaching this last semester, I was saying to a lot of my students, I said, look, you're barely taking like dedicated AI courses yet. But when you go into the workforce, I can guarantee you, your managers, your leads are going to look at you and say, tell me what Gen AI is. How can I use this? How can I leverage it? And so some of the opportunities that may present themselves in the future are really getting deep into that. And my last sort of foray, maybe the last 3 or 4 months at Google, was getting into specifically for AI, risk and compliance, the security of AI, and sort of leveraging my experience of the full tech stack. How do programs work? How do data centers work? How does the cloud work? And sort of incorporating the AI layer on top of that. But I am sort of walking away from that because, the web stuff just evolved and evolved and evolved, and AI is going to do the same thing.
Of course. I want to get into it, right? So, because like you said, with friends, I follow you on social media. I know that even while you were, in your career, you've done I think we just went blank for a second. You've done a lot of exciting trips, right? So I've always seen you like living your life, having fun. And when I say exciting trips, personally, my definition of excitement, I'll find some Caribbean island, lamp on a beach, swim, work out, have some fun, maybe some ATV. Dan, on the other hand's version of an exciting trip is like going to Afghanistan or going to Iraq, So I've watched you do these types of adventure trips, and I love watching it because this is something I probably would not do or even want to do. And I guess the question I'm going about to ask is, you outside looking in, obviously, you seem to have created this life in which you work, but you play hard and doing things that you're passionate about, things that kind of are off the beaten path, So to totally step away right now, I never saw you as somebody who's just 100%. I mean, you work hard putting in like maybe 80-hour weeks, but you've also had time to enjoy yourself and things of that nature. So complete, like the step away. I just want to drill into that. Why?
Some of it is refocusing.
Okay.
So for 25, 26 years, I lived in New York, in Manhattan. And first off, I mean, there's just a different attitude when you're there. It seems like everybody's moving, everybody's working, everybody's doing something all the time. Number one. Number two, I mean, I can't count the number. Like, I've never taken more than 3 weeks off in a row in my entire career. Right. And I think, again, it's partially regional. If you talk to some of my colleagues in Europe, that's not necessarily the case. But with that, I'd get to the point where it's like, hey, I have the financial means to do some funky exotic trips. Let me do those. Right. And so, I've been around. I mean, I've been to most countries. I should go back and do a country count. My buddy Jeff that I travel with has a very rigid schedule. He and I kind of knock them off together. But I'm definitely in the 120s, maybe 130s of countries at this point. But now I'm kind of in maybe a late bloomer. I'm in the family stage, right? So we're doing more of the Disney cruises. We're doing more of the, hey, I got a 6-year-old at home. We're doing the, hey, let's go out west and let's hit up the national parks this summer, right? Making decisions like that. So being able to not have to work 40 hours a week, say over the summer, and we're not doing this year, but kid gets out of school end of May, we could peace out until she has to go back to school in August, right? And that's not something you can really commit to with a 40-hour-a-week job.
Would you say that was a major decision in terms of the family aspect, the daughter aspect, going and spending more time? I remember you saying about I was reading your bio about pumpkin carving and how that's a non-negotiable right now. Would you say that was a major factor in your decision?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And to give your audience some context on that, Namdi was like, hey, can you just write me a little bio, like what's up? And I was talking a little bit about the Die with Zero. And again, last semester, from August through December, I was off teaching, and I was actually staying on site. I'm in Raleigh, but I was going out to Greensboro, which is like annoyingly close and far. It's about an hour away, but I threw myself into that opportunity, and I really valued the experience. My students, I still hear from quite a few of them. They're like, Faltyn, you used to, we did office hours. I would do code jams at night. I had this like great space where we would just work on assignments, till all hours. And I was like staying in hotels. And with that though, I remember it was November 1st of this year. My 6-year-old came up to me. She's like, Dan, we didn't do pumpkins this year. And I was like, shit, And it really wouldn't have been that hard for me to, ironically, carve out the time, right, to carve up a pumpkin with my 6-year-old, right? Like, it doesn't take that much time, but I missed it, right? How many of those do you get? Like, you don't get more than 18, right? I'm pretty sure that's all you get, right, with a kid, unless you're doing your 20s, whatever. But missed that opportunity. So this sort of changing of my mind is like, why don't we prioritize that? Why don't we prioritize those activities? Is it really that much harder than prioritizing, if you're going into an office? Well, I got to be button seat by 9. It's so different.
That's interesting because that seems to relate back to the Die with Zero concept, where you're saying, family time. It's not only about the financial aspect, but it's different aspects. Like, what are you spending on, right? So that's how I took it.
Yeah, exactly. And the author, he makes a great example. It's funny because have you read the book? Are you familiar with it?
No, I've heard about it. I have not read it, but it's going to be on my list right now.
Yeah, throw it in because the dude was the guy who wrote Perkins, I think. He was like an energy trader, and he has this one story about how, like in his 20s, I think it was something like him and his buddy, they just passed their Series 7, and his buddy said, "Hey, I'm going to go celebrate. I'm going to go off and backpack around Europe." And he's like, "Dude, we're about to make this jump going from $26,000 a year to $36,000 a year. You're going to give that up to go backpack around Europe?" And his buddy did it, and his buddy quit his job and came back, and got hired into the same position, as his friend. His friend, kept rising up. And then when he was in his 30s, he said, "Oh, I'm going to go backpack around Europe." And when he tried to do it, he's like, "I'm 32, 33. I am not sleeping on train station floors." I remember those days. I loved doing that. That was great. I am not sleeping on a train station floor in like Darjeeling, India again. Like, I'm not doing that now, but when I was 22, 23, it was an awesome story.
No, that's the case. There's certain things that I think about in my life I wouldn't want to go back to. But there's certain things that I'm right now finding myself actually doing, especially when it comes to training and stuff. I train with a bunch of guys in their 20s, and I compete in that same, in terms of jujitsu, I compete in that same bracket. So it's really interesting being around that energy, where a lot of my friends think I'm totally nuts and say, I'm these guys are not going to hurt me, but it helps me. I actually feel younger just being around that energy. So it's an interesting dynamic in which they help me a lot more than they know. So I could understand certain aspects of that. When you announced retirement, what did your peers think?
My parents or
your colleagues?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think my parents were a little surprised. Sorry, my parents. My parents were a little bit surprised, and they were like, "What are you gonna do?" And I gave this answer to my parents and my peers and everybody else. I said, and again, of course, I ran the numbers. My working career, it's been 8,000 business days. It's been 11,000 total elapsed days without having 3 weeks off. I said, I want some time just to not do or think about anything. And like, even my sister, she told me, she said, "You're going to last about a month." And she's not wrong, right? It's been about, I don't know, 2 weeks maybe. And I'm a little like, okay, I can only watch so much Netflix or Hulu. And so I'm already looking at different, opportunities, like volunteering with my university, trying to figure out, is there a possibility to teach again, in the fall? But, not wanting to commit to anything just yet. Like you said, somebody could drop an opportunity in my lap and say, "Hey, we're going to pay you, 7 figures to come here for a year to do something." I mean, I'm not an idiot. I would love to be like, "Yep, going to take it." Right. But at the same time, it's like, I just stopped after 11,000 days. Can I just do nothing? So my peers, lots of questions, lots of skepticism that it's sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking when you were breaking down the numbers, I was like, tell me you're a math major without telling me you're a math major. And it's like, you're the only one that I know who's ever quantified exactly how many days they work. Hey, man, I love it, though. I love it. No, I mean, so let's get into that, right? Like, in terms of sustainability, obviously, one thing I take, we're both cybersecurity people, and I'm very cautious about privacy. So I don't want to talk exact numbers because that's no one's business but you and your families. But I do want you to give some gems of what someone in their 20s, maybe 30s, can start thinking about in terms of retirement. I mean, I'm curious to, like, how would one structure that to ensure that they have a smooth transition?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Good thing to think about. So, at least in the United States, and other countries have similar, structures, but things like your 401k, if your company offers a pension plan, things like that. So for me, when I first started working, back in the mid 90s, I participated in the company's 401k plan. And at the time, we weren't, I think, maybe my first job out of university, I was making 40 something, right? But I took, 10% off the top, or 20%, whatever the heck it was. I couldn't fully fund my 401k at the time, but I just, it was a non-negotiable. And, we started our careers, I think, when the pension concept was kind of going out of flavor in private sector. I mean, it still exists in some industries in public sector, but it was your responsibility to take care of yourself, in 40, 50 years. So that just constant take out, eventually got to the point where I made enough where I could take out the max it out. Okay. Now start exploring other options. Your, backdoor, Roth, doing your backdoor Roth, if you have extra money that you want to convert. So just that consistency and doing it over 30, 40 years. And it's funny, my wife and I were just talking about this, probably I would say conservatively, even if you're in like a boom time, like we were in the .com boom, you're not going to see the number move, right? Very much. I mean, you're going to see it move a bunch, but if you try to do the math in your head and say, hey, I want to retire when I'm 50, and you're like, I'm probably going to live and be productive for 30, 40 more years after that. My gosh, I've got 50 grand in my 401k. That's not going to cut it. Well, you're right. It's not, but basic 10% rate of return, you're going to double your money every 7-ish years. Right. And if you consistently invest and you take advantage of those options, it becomes a non-negotiable. You might find yourself in a position where it's like, you know what? I have enough to take care of myself when it's time to retire. Now, it's a separate question if you want to retire early, right? If you need to run the numbers, it's like, okay, well, then you're going to have to save in some vehicles that you can touch, before you're 59 and a half.
Makes sense. Do you have a lot of people when they think about retirement, they get concerned about healthcare, things of that nature. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, knock wood, it wasn't too egregious going out onto the marketplace and just finding health insurance that was appropriate for me and the family. I was very fortunate at Google. Google had very good healthcare and it wasn't very expensive. But, just to expand from just healthcare, we got a dedicated financial planner about a year ago to sort of start this out. And you're right. That's sort of oh my gosh, healthcare is going to be so expensive. You know what? It is what it is. As long as you know what it's going to be, it becomes less scary. And if you build it into your model and you say, hey, I'm going to have to pay $1,500 a month or whatever the heck it ends up being, okay. I mean, it's just a cost, right? That's no different than saying, well, I want to spend $1,500 a month dining out or $1,500 a month, traveling or whatever the heck it is, right? You just put a name to it and, take it out of the closet and be like, okay, listen, this is something I have to face. Okay. Put it on the budget.
Yeah. Cause that's like a big concern. I mean, obviously, biggest concerns around retirement is one, I don't want to run out of money. Two, if something happens health related, am I able to cover it? These are thoughts that people are having, in their 70s, 80s, and so forth. So to hear someone, at that way before that, late 40s or so, talk about that, it's because you have now more time. So that's what will concern a lot of people about retirement early, because everyone always talks about, benefits and I need this, I need that. So, definitely wants to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I don't feel, the insurance plan that we ended up getting on the marketplace is materially this. It's with the same insurance company that I had with my last employer. It's just, it's a different classification of the plan. I'm sure I have to pay more because the employee doesn't pay their share. But things like my out-of-pocket maximum, things like the deductible, things like the providers that I can see, I don't think I'm in any, from the healthcare perspective, in any riskier perspective than I am at work, right? It's not like if something catastrophic really happened, that work would jump in and say, oh, okay, we're going to pay the extra. I mean, your plan has an out-of-pocket maximum. In theory, that's what you pay, right? So I don't know if it's a different situation there. Now, the general running out of money thing, well, that's a whole other topic. But from the healthcare perspective, yeah, I do appreciate that one, but I don't see it as being any riskier than, what I face today at work.
Can you talk about some of your patents? I'm always interested in that.
Yeah, it's funny. I wish I ever made a dime off of any of them directly, I think.
Stories on that, my friend. But yeah, I'm curious to talk about that.
Yeah. So back in my day, so this was iPhones had just come out, and the banks were paying stupid money for everybody to walk around with a BlackBerry. And the executives said, why are we paying for BlackBerries and everybody's got their own personal phone? And employees started complaining, well, I don't want to have a work phone and a personal phone. And so I think it was at Goldman at the time. They took me and another more senior engineer, and they said, hey, we want you to build a secure container. And this predates MDM, right? The managed device sort of stuff. So it predates that. So we built effectively an encrypted container that could go on a personal device that couldn't be tampered with. And we could transmit securely information from the mothership back in the bank onto the device. And, when we think about it in retrospect, sure, it's using fundamental things like TLS encryption, right? Did you not screw it up though? Right? What you're actually sending, was it, did we encrypt it underneath the TLS tunnel? Oh, absolutely. Right. There was like encryption on encryption, so the patent that we got, one of the patents that we got, was on that whole process, that whole infrastructure. And at the end of the day, where we built an email app, a calendar app, an RSA like secure token app. And pretty much the bank could build any apps on our framework. It ended up being used just for defensive purposes, in case somebody else came after the bank and said, well, here, we have a patent on this sort of stuff. Eventually it got sold. They sold it off to somebody else. And then I think the landscape changed, like MDM came out and the phone provider started to recognize like, oh, you were serious about like people wanting to do business and personal on the same device, and became built into the device. Right. So
what would you say, looking back, is your proudest professional accomplishment or moment?
And I mentioned this before. I was very fortunate to operate in a variety of different ways, be it an individual contributor, being an educator when I was at A&T, managing small teams in big companies. Like at Google, I think the max number of people I managed was 5. The company I worked at before, Blue Matrix, we had, 30, 40 developers across the world. So it was a different profile. And it's the people, it's seeing the people, how I made their lives like a little bit easier. Sometimes in as a programmer, you build an app and you don't necessarily see the impact. I mean, I guess maybe if you build like a killer app that billions of people use, but in the banks, I was building apps that 100 people used, and of course the bank made millions of dollars. But I never necessarily see those people. I didn't see the impact. I didn't see the reaction. And so the people that I've worked with, and I've seen them go from, level 3 to level 4, level 5 to level 6, when they're in some of the bigger firms or whatever the classification is. That was great. It was great to be like, wow, hopefully I helped them, do that. And I took that same sort of mentality when I was teaching. So when I was teaching at A&T, I kind of a lot of times would talk to the students kind of like anybody who knows me knows I'm not a sports guy. But I would consider myself their coach, right? And we were talking about this before off air. Did I have some students who struggled and they didn't pass the class? Yeah. But more often than not, there were some students, like if they were struggling, it wasn't my job to give them a challenging problem. It was my job to sit with them and say, okay, let's work on this problem together. Let's figure out where you are, what we need to do to get you to the point that you can solve this problem, right? So I always considered their success my success. So that would be the biggest success from a career perspective.
What qualities do you feel in those scenarios made you a good leader?
I think that the number one quality was just the willingness to do it. right? I think a lot of people are afraid to be a teacher, to be a mentor. And I don't mean like get in front of a classroom teach. I mean, that's it. That's a whole different animal. But, you know, again, early on, I didn't really have this understanding that the web, nobody we worked with at the banks in the 90s knew what the web was. But you and I could probably stand up a web server in the 90s. I don't remember exactly, but we probably could. We could at least build out HTML pages, right? None of our bosses wouldn't even have a clue. They wouldn't know how to even start that. But I do remember giving lunch and learns and telling people, well, why don't we try this? Let's do this, right? So that willingness to talk, that willingness to sort of showcase what you know. And I think part and parcel with that is the willingness to be wrong or to stand up and go, okay, so listen, I figured out how to make this work. I have no idea how any of this actually works, right? Because especially as you get more advanced in your career, you have to just, stuff is just abstracted, right? And I think I have a pretty good grasp about how a lot of stuff works. Oh, no. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I have a pretty good grasp about how a lot of stuff works. And I wasn't afraid to come out and be like, hey, listen, I know this part of all of this. Let's talk about this, you know? So I think those two things are probably the biggest attributes.
So, you know, so in looking at, those are the attributes of a good leader, right? Just being able to step up, right? And do it regardless of the fear factor or the imposter syndrome, right? You like, they gave you the opportunity, take advantage of it. Let's put the step forward. If you're wrong, admit it and be honest. And also you mentioned in terms of proudest professional moments, you know, the team growth or watching individuals grow into certain roles. That's one aspect. On another note, what did your teams teach you?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I will talk about, there's some very specific things, right? Let me talk about the teaching stuff, right? Because I considered, again, I was the professor, but the number of my students, I remember like the first day of class, I'm like, you can call me professor, you can call me Faltyn, you know, whatever, I don't care, right? And there was always this, I had to sort of appreciate where the students came from. And some students were, I mean, just like a diversity is kind of a loaded word these days, but like the fact that, here's an example. I had several students who had trouble typing. Anybody in your audience that you're kind of from the programming side of it, right? You sit down at a keyboard, you start bashing away, but you have to have an appreciation. I had some students that they spent their whole life learning on iPads, right? And so this was like literally the first time they were asked to type, and not just type, you know, English text. As a programmer, you're typing different symbols and parentheses and curly braces and all this stuff, right? And you're building some muscle memory with the students. So one of the things I learned from the students is, you know, and again, it could be applied to your leadership as a manager or whatever else. You have to understand where they're at in order to achieve, you know, whatever that result you want to get to. If that result is I want to pass the class, I want the student to pass the class, or we want to deliver this software, or we want to complete this risk assessment. You know, if you have somebody who's like, you want me to do a risk assessment, but I don't know what impact and likelihood are. Oh, okay. So I think the thing that I learned over the time from managing people is having a little bit of that time to sort of step back and empathize, right?
So empathy.
Yep.
That makes sense. You know, and that's like, I think it's a huge pillar that really the good leaders have, you know, in terms of, you know, in being in the industry so long, it's a funny story, right? So I'm not going to mention names. I'm not going to mention companies, but it was a conference call early in my career, and I was one of the people in the conference call, and we were supporting a very, very aggressive trader. So he was on the business, we were on the technology side, and I never forget this. It was a global call, so people across the board were on this call, and one of the people that we needed at the time needed an answer for something he was doing. I forget what the details, was not on the call. And I'll never forget this guy cursing on the call and saying, I don't care what the F he's doing. This is the most important thing in his life. Find him. And I was like, the most important thing? That's how I was thinking. I was like, wait. I mean, I granted a lot of money on the line. I get it. We're supporting the business. It's a big deal. These are publicly traded organizations. But then when he said it, I was like, the most important thing? I don't know why that, like, I just always thought about that. Like, I mean, he wasn't directed at me. I was on the call. It was late at night. I was there. But I was just like, the most important thing? Like, really, dude? Like, and no one, and because he was so this polarizing, powerful figure, no one even batted an eye. No one questioned it. I was young. I wasn't going to say it. I just kept quiet. Like, but in my head, I was like, the most important thing?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of leaders, not a lot, well, I think there are leaders that actually lack empathy they never were taught that lesson. So to bring that up, I think it's spot on.
Yeah, and again, I don't know. I mean, we've been around the block a little bit. I get it. You have some managers that are just trying to herd the cats, right? If you're a leader, though, if you're trying to like actually achieve an objective, if you're myopically focused on that result and that's all you care about, that is the most important thing. But you turned a blind eye to what's going on with the different people that are supposed to get you there. You're not going to get there, right? So this is the most important thing, but you don't know that, Bob's in the hospital or, worst case scenario, whatever it is, right? It'd be like, wait, Bob, get out of the hospital. You got to get this call. It's the most important thing. And he'd be like, actually.
I heard a quote recently, and it so resonated with me. It said, a healthy person has 1,000 problems, right? It can be, my car needs to be fixed. This happened. A sick person only has one problem. And I was just like, what? And it was just so profound, simple but profound. I was like, because you think about it, like most people, there's a million things. Okay, we got a comment from the audience. I didn't say that. Please, we always love your comments, your questions. I just got so caught up talking to my old friend about retirement that I totally didn't make that announcement. But let me happy Friday. That willingness and drive to give back and increase your team's knowledge so that they grow on their own. That's truly remarkable. Thanks for sharing that. I strive to keep that mentality for all those I mentor. Have you ever come across adversity when trying to increase the skills for employees, students, etc., from management? And what pointers do you have to get through it?
I would say in some organizations, and kind of like I'll take the NAMD card on this one. In some organizations, I'm not gonna name any. There's a playbook for advancement. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you're going to get to this result. And that's a fact of life. And I've worked in the organizations that had the best of intentions, and the corporate speak was, we want Dan to grow and be a leader and do this. Oh, Dan didn't do this 1 hour training? Well, I mean, sorry, man, you're not getting the promo this time or whatever it is. So I consider that sort of the adversity, right? And sort of the things that you have to come to, and I'll say this, it's the things you have to come to grips with, right? And I was very fortunate, like in some of my roles where I managed people or I mentored people, and then I moved on and I maintained the relationship. But I think I was always, especially a little bit more free with my words after the fact to say, okay, so listen, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, and I'm going to tell you what you need to hear. This sucks. You got to do A, B, C, and D. Make sure you do those things. Okay, cool. You did those things. All right, now listen, let's talk about what's really your area of growth. What are your areas of improvement or your areas of strength that we need to highlight here? That's the most important thing. But the reality of working at companies that have 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, whatever it is, there's going to be rules. There's going to be a machine. And if your paperwork doesn't fit in, it's going to get kicked. So, yeah.
Now we're talking about like companies, and I'm more so interested. Your bio has Google, so we're going to talk about that. But how do you feel working in big tech like Google differed from traditional financial institutions like the big banks and the things like that you worked in, from the JPMorgans, the Goldman Sachs, and so forth? Curious.
Yeah, good question. So I didn't work in any, like I was in risk management at Google, and even kind of like at the end here, I was working in AI, but was sort of in the risk and compliance space, all under CISO, so all in cybersecurity effectively, right? The domain, right? Our main mission wasn't financial services, right? When I worked at Goldman, that was our main mission. That's what you supported. And so the difference, obviously, when I went over to Google, was supporting did I do risk assessments for financial services? Yes. Did I participate in conversations? Yes. It was like 1/100th of my workload, right? And so it was focusing on something different, Yeah.
That makes sense. I was just curious, like that shift, going from pure financial services, because sometimes I've seen certain colleagues in the past who they made the transition to big tech, but because their specialty was in finance, they supported that aspect of the big tech's business dealing with financial services. So to hear you got more of a broad spectrum of various verticals. This was curious.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen people that were brought in, and they were brought in because of that expertise, and they worked in that domain. And I believe I was probably tapped for certain assignments, but I think it was more a product of somewhere in the chain of command was, didn't Dan work at a bank? Yeah. Okay. Why don't you have him jump on that call? Right. Because it wasn't just the domain. I think actually the more important thing was you understood the mentality, you understood the words, you understood how they go about a problem, right? Because, a banker is going to have a different understanding of regulation than an AI startup. Regulations mean drastically different things, right? Like ISO 42001 is kind of very nascent. Okay, so you're not meeting this control, whatever. What's the ramification? Well, nobody knows. Oh, you're a bank and you have SOC 2 certification and you just let XYZ happen. Okay, we're shutting it down, right? So there's two drastically different perspectives that you need to appreciate. So having the finance sort of aspect, you could go in and understand why regulation was super important.
Now, of course, look, we, you see in the industry, especially in finance, where like it's a certain vertical where it's interesting because you have conversations with finance friends, and when they say their bonus is that they're getting their salary for their bonus and not more. You talk to other verticals and they go, no, I got 100% bonus. You're like, what exactly does that mean? Oh, I'm like, literally, it's like 6% of your paycheck or something like that. So it's this concept of golden handcuffs, right? That you're in this game, and it's just so hard to walk away because the money is just so good. And you're like, I don't know. So what advice would you have for high performers in their 30s and 40s who feel stuck in the golden handcuff?
I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to take a different, again, a lot of my stuff is predicated on my teaching. I was very open with the students I taught. And when they would ask for my motivation of why I would do X, Y, Z, I said money. Even to the point, here's the point. When I was in university, I remember I interviewed with JPMorgan and I interviewed with the census. And the census, it sounded like a really interesting job. And I was a math major at the time. And so like it was a bit more quantitative than what the pitch at Morgan was going to be. Morgan was more programming, which, you know, ended up being my core competency. But it was like, oh, is that actually the job that I want, you know, which paid more? Well, you know, Morgan, JP Morgan paid more, right? So it was sort of like golden handcuffs right from the get-go. And I had said to my students, you know, last semester, like, why are you doing this? Money. And I don't think that's a wrong answer. And especially, again, if you have some empathy and you think about where some people came from and you put that in perspective of where you are, yeah, that is a definite motivating factor. But I remember walking through this exercise with a student. I said, okay, how much would make you happy out of university? If I made $100,000 a year, that would make me happy. I'm like, cool. Then what? What happens in 2 years? What happens when you become accustomed to spending that $100,000? Well, then I want 250. Okay, cool. Then what? Right? And so you will perpetually have this golden handcuff sort of mentality, but don't dismiss, again, we're kind of anchoring on this die with zero sort of concept. What capital are you giving up? What capital aren't you spending? Because you're spending all your time on the financial capital. To get that 250, like, what did I say? I never had 3 weeks off, right? In elapsed 11,000 days. I certainly gave up something, right? I gave up the opportunity to do a 3-month vacation somewhere there.
We'll say, Dan, though, just to add in, most people that I talk to outside of teachers never had more than 3 weeks off.
No, they absolutely don't. But you've also worked with a lot of Europeans where not taking less than 3 weeks off is a sin.
Yeah, of course. I mean that part. Was so interesting, right? Because as you were talking, I wanted to. I like this golden handcuff conversation is very interesting because I remember watching some financial movie. I forget what it was, some financial drama movie about whatever it was. And they were all these guys in some sort of like boardroom meeting night situation. And one of the characters, right? The guy was like, well, how much is enough? He said, more. Point blank, period. More. No number, just more. And I remember, early on in the career, like chasing this number. And then you start hitting these numbers and you're like, wow, it's great. Wow. And you, like you said, you get accustomed to this number. Now you want more. And so it becomes this aggression to get more and more. And then you start to, at least in my life, you start to realize, after a while, it's not, and to be 100%, I think COVID taught me this lesson. And this is recent. This is like, 5 years ago, right? I'm sitting at home, not driving. I'm not, I used to love these tailor-made suits and tailor-made shirt stuff. I had this guy. I'm not wearing any of those things. I'm wearing like workout clothes every single day. I'm at home and I just had this realization, like, dude, you want more to support this lifestyle, but what if you're no longer living this lifestyle? Do you need more? And all of a sudden, you're like sitting there, and the things that you were valuing previously, and I want to go to this restaurant, go this, and you can't go anywhere. And you're like, well, I got food, I got this, I got, I got the things that I need. And then coming out of it, like, changed my perspective. Like, yeah, I like going to yoga at 6 a.m. But I remember commuting to New York for 2 hours during that time. But I would still go straight to the gym, but then it's like, no, I like going early morning jujitsu in the morning. I like work. So after coming out of that, it was things that I like doing that just started to become, the goal is a lifestyle now. Like I want to create a certain lifestyle that I'm happy with. And prior to COVID, it was not like I'm going to train to New York. I'm doing this. I'm just grind. And not saying I'm not grinding right now. Just it was a perspective shift for me coming COVID.
You had asked me earlier. I want to dig into something a little bit more, but you would ask like some advice for people, and I said sort of the consistency of investing. For people in your audience here who are getting a little bit closer, and up to them to decide what closer means. Are you 30? Are you 40? Whatever. At some point, get a financial planner. And I think one of the big traps, especially with those of us who work in finance, we know how this works, right? I know how the stock market works. I know the difference between a stock and a bond, and you understand this stuff, and maybe you're super competent in whatever your domain is. A little tangent, but I have not. I know what's going on in the world right now from a finance perspective. I have refused to watch the news in the last 3 days. I don't want to see what's actually going on in the market. And here's the reason why. We started planning for this exit, my wife and I, about a year ago, and we got a financial planner, and we figured out what we needed to survive for the rest of our lives and what sort of lifestyle that afforded us, what's important, where we wanted to spend, all those other different non-monetary capital, right? Traveling, the kid, whatever it was. And so I know I'm good for this period of time. And at some point, sure, I'm going to have to make a decision if the market is still catastrophic. But, fingers crossed, my financial planner did enough Monte Carlo simulations that he's like, okay, you said you wanted to be good for 5 years. You're good for 5 years. You don't need to look at the stock market. Like, is now a great time to go in and make adjustments? Sure. Would now be a great time to dump some money in? Sure. I'm not working. I don't have an income stream coming in. It doesn't matter, right? And so I think, one bit of advice is when you are sort of planning that exit, start putting together what you need to spend all that other capital, what you need to do with your time, with your money. Do you need to go back to work? Yeah.
No, that's great. And, a lot of my guests that come on, they always say, what? We need to, I have an important meeting at 1 p.m. that I have to get to. And I know, you have an important meeting at 1 p.m. that you have to get to.
That's so right. Third quarter grades for our 6-year-old.
Yes. And that's the priority right now. So I want to respect that. I could talk, like, you could have a conversation on this, for an infinite amount of time. I didn't even get into skydiving. Last question. Do you still skydive? Like, for those that don't know, like, I've skydived before, right? I was attached to some other man and we jumped out of a plane, right? That's not what Dan was doing. He was skydiving on a whole other level. And it was amazing to watch from afar. Are you still doing that?
Schrodinger's, it's sort of like I'm in a Schrodinger's cat stage of retirement. I'm also in a Schrodinger's cat state of skydiving. And what I mean by that is, am I still skydiving? Yes. When is the last time I went? Last time I went was January, right? And so again, what Namdi's talking about, there was a period in my life where it was every weekend, right? Every Saturday, me and the gang would get together and we would go, bust out, 5 to 10 jumps. My last trip in January, 2 of us went down to Florida. Over the course of 4 days, we did 2, so things are changing a little bit. I don't want to give up the 20 plus years of experience I've gained in the sport, but it's not the biggest priority right now.
And I think that's a good way to end it. What we do in our show is at the end, we give our guests the platform to talk about anything that they want to talk about. In your case, whatever you want to talk about, whatever message you want to leave, and I'm going to give you that time.
Oh man, wow. He totally just disappears here. Well, I appreciate the friendlies that I know that join this and the people that I don't know. Thanks for listening to me ramble on, if that's what it was. But do yourself a favor, look up the book or the podcast Die with Zero. I did the podcast. I'm more of a listener than a reader. And just give it some thought and see if it changes your perspective. I think that's all I have, Namdi. I don't know if you jump back in here, but that's my thoughts.
That's how you know the guy's retiring, because anyone else I give this time to, oh yeah, everything's going good. They talk about their business. Here's how you can find us. And it's like, dude, go check out the podcast, read the book, man. Go live a good life.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. And because I'm not retired, you can also go subscribe to Tech Behind FinTech. We have a weekly newsletter that I would like everyone to subscribe to. And I will put it here, the Tech Behind FinTech /subscribe. We're going to have a ton of new guests. And, we're going to announce a show that we're going to be producing that's going to come out. I'm not going to spill the bag on it until we have the name and everything, but it'll be very interesting. It's not replacing this current show, because this is our standard, but it's in addition to. So announcements will come the next couple of months about that. But in the meantime, subscribe to our newsletter for free FinTech news and also upcoming guests and shows and things of that nature. Listen, Dan, appreciate you for hopping on. Hopefully, we'll circle back again for, I don't know, to tap into what our retirement life for teaching or something around FinTech.
When I'm unretired again.
Yeah, man. You really, or you get like an amazing, if you come back like Jordan did, to win another championship. We'll talk to you about that. To everyone else, thank you for joining this podcast. Really appreciate the viewership. As I always say, whether you are viewing it today, live, tomorrow, or next year, appreciate your viewership, appreciate the messages. All those that subscribe, definitely appreciate you. Before you go, going to have some guys are saying something. Gregory Pruitt, appreciate you guys for the wisdom.
Aggie Pride is one of my Aggies.
Nice. Erin, congratulations on your retirement. I want to be next.
That's my sister.
That's your sister. Okay, that's what's up. Love it. All right, guys. Thank you very much, Dan. Get to your important meeting. And to everyone else, have a great weekend. Take care, guys. Cheers.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.